This story destroyed the relationship between father and son, and made its author hate the moment when he accepted the offer to write and publish something for children. Not everyone knows the sad truth behind the creation of a book about the wayward bear Winnie-the-Pooh and his eccentric friends. For example, the characters of this children's book, as a manual, can be used to study the most famous mental disorders, or about referring to serious, not at all childish addictions. We invite you to be moved to the other side of the stories and find out what the Winnie-the-Pooh fairy tale really hides. It is impossible to tell about Milne's children's books and characters without intertwining their existence, characters, and stories themselves with the reality of the Milne family. After all, Winnie-the-Pooh Bear's best friend from the book, Christopher Robin, was literally real. Vinny, Piglet, Eeyore, Kanga, and Roo were also real, even though they couldn't move or talk in our world. But Christopher Robin could, because he was a living boy of flesh and bone. It didn't even occur to Alan Milne to change the name of his son, whom he made a character in his book. And the names of the bear and other inhabitants of the fabulous Hundred Acre Wood were the real names of toys and imaginary friends of his son. The prototype of Hundred Acre Wood was a real forest, Ashdown Forest in East Sussex, where the Milne family had an estate and where little Christopher played with his favorite toys. What is wrong and sad about all this, you may ask? A wonderful true story is based on real events. Everything would have been fine, but the boy, a real boy, named Christopher Robin, without his consent, and even without understanding what was happening, had to become a superstar at the age of only 6 years. How did this happen? Christopher Robin Milne was born in Britain, to a respectable family with a high social status. His father was a mathematician for a long time, but later, to the misfortune of Christopher and the happiness of all mankind, he retrained in a writer. An adult, serious dramatic writer who wrote plays and detective stories. But the trouble is, there were plenty of detectives in Britain at that time. The competition was fierce, and publishers were less and less happy to accept such manuscripts. One day, Alan Milne's publisher suggested that he try writing a book for children in return. And so, watching his young son play with his favorite teddy bear and other toys, Milne, unexpectedly for himself, began to compose stories. First, a separate, very first story was published in the New Year's issue of a well-known British magazine. And then in 1926, the first book, Winnie-the-Pooh, was published, which was a huge success. Then, in 1928, the second part was released, and in between, Milne also released a collection of poems and songs, which also became very popular. What could be bad and harmful for the child in this? We'll get back to this question after we analyze the actual characters. Both books consist of a large number of short stories, most of which are about Winnie-the-Pooh. Of course, we will not tell you all of them, but we will refresh your memory of the most famous stories from the first book. After all, just remembering individual episodes, we will touch on the second sensitive topic, which we decided to consider in our analysis. Namely, they're the characters of the story, which will not be enough to call only strange. Adult writer, mathematician, Alan Alexander Milne, putting all his writing experience, irony, and encyclopedic awareness into creating characters made them unique, each with its own bumblebees in its head. So, Winnie-the-Pooh. It first appears in the preface to the first story, when Christopher Robin drags him down the stairs, holding his hind paw. At the same time, the toy hits its head on each step. Maybe it was Winnie's manner of transportation that was the main reason that bear was, to put it mildly, a little stupid. Not that it had sawdust in his head instead of a brain. This imbecility of Winnie is the main reason for most of the troubles that he got into itself and dragged his friends with it. Already in the first adventure, perhaps the most famous of all, we begin to note the somewhat eccentric behavior of the teddy bear. This fat guy is ready to do anything, literally, for the sake of honey. And the unrestrained call of his stomach makes it both climb a tall tree to the nest of bees and fall with a crash from there. But that didn't stop it. It begged its friend, a real boy named Christopher Robin, for a balloon, and was obsessed with the crazy idea of pretending to be a cloud to deceive the bees. Wallowing in the mud and clinging to the balloon again, rose into the sky to the beehive. How did it all end? Of course it was a fiasco, like most brilliant Winnie's ideas. To get the teddy bears back away from the bees, the boy was forced to hit the balloon with a gun. Even in this story, we are alarmed by the bear's obvious obsession with honey. But the second story confirms that it is not only an ordinary sweet tooth, which just loves sweets. The second story shows us more disturbing moments in its craving. In this story, Pooh went to visit its friend Rabbit and actually invited itself to a treat. Pooh got into its hole, and until it had completely devoured all the honey reserves that the owner had, it refused to get up from the table. Agree, this is already a clear deviation from the norm, but what happened next is generally terrifying. It turns out that the teddy bear ate so much and got so fat that climbing out of the rabbit hole, it got stuck tightly in the entrance opening. That is, it had absolutely no control over the amount of food it consumed. To get out of the trap, Pooh had to spend a whole week in this position until it lost weight and could get out on its own. And here we have to focus on Winnie-the-Pooh's serious problem with food. From the point of view of experts, the teddy bear clearly traces the binge-eating disorder. Its thoughts constantly revolve around honey, while the teddy bear completely lacks control over itself and its food intake, even to the point of harming itself. Another symptom of bed, moments of anxiety and fears also associated with honey. The fear of being left without it, the fear that you will not eat enough of what is available, is added to this. But the fact that Winnie has problems with honey, with a specific type of food, leads to another guess. Maybe it's even worse, and the bear has an addiction. Winnie-the-Pooh is constantly looking for honey, and this search becomes the center of its life. Honey is a sweetness that causes joy and peace in Pooh. Its passion for honey can be compared to how an addicted person is looking for a substance that brings him relief and pleasure. In the first book, it says, "If I suddenly wake up in the morning and don't eat honey, I feel completely empty." When Pooh doesn't have honey, it becomes dissatisfied, annoyed, and restless. It often dreams of honey or remembers its taste as if it feels the need for a dose. Although Milne created these stories primarily as fairy tales for his son, it should be noted that substance addiction has always been a significant social theme, and even more so in the 1920s. In addition, we recall that before that, Milne wrote on more serious topics and could subconsciously put adult things into Winnie's character that bothered him. Unfortunately for the nice and cute teddy bear, its disorders are not limited to dependence on honey, but we will tell you more about this later. In most of the stories, Christopher Robin acted as a wise, intelligent teacher, savior, judge, and highest authority. He was a kind of god in Hundred Acre Wood. Was it Daddy Milne who came up with such a role and line of behavior for him? Or was it Christopher himself who positioned himself in this way in his games? If so, it also makes you wonder if everything was all right with little C.R. Milne. Some of the Pooh's theories attribute schizophrenia to the boy. That is, he did not just play, realizing that all this is not real, but seriously believed that the toys were talking to him. Although there is a more realistic theory. Rather, Christopher, who, like most high-class children in Victorian Britain, was raised by nannies or governesses, was very lonely. Deprived of the real attention of his parents, he came up with an imaginary world for himself, 100 Acre Wood. There he had a bunch of strange friends who not only loved him, but also revered him as the highest authority. So the insecure boy asserted himself, not at the expense of real people, but thanks to the support of his imaginary friends. Yes, it's sad, but it's not a diagnosis. A real diagnosis can be made with confidence for the character of the fairy tale, which we will meet in the next few stories, the plush donkey Eeyore. The elderly gray donkey Eeyore suffered from severe depression. He spent most of his time alone, and although everyone loved him, he very often dropped out of joint activities only because either they forgot to inform him, or he himself forgot that he was also invited. When something sad happened to him, he was not at all surprised because he was sure that it could not be otherwise with him. In the first story in which we meet him, he lost his tail, which was later found by Winnie-the-Pooh. The tail was adapted to the string for the doorbell in the owl's house. Even the disappearance of the tail, an integral part of it, Eeyore took with sad doom. In the next story, on his birthday, it turns out that everyone forgot about it. He told Winnie-the-Pooh about it in between, just stating with sad irony that today was the happiest day of the year for him. The donkey was unhappy. He had no gifts, no birthday cake, and in general everyone left and forgot him. Of course, the teddy bear sent the whole forest into a frenzy to organize a celebration for the donkey. And what we have, from the most unhappy creature, Eeyore instantly turns into the most touched. He is almost shocked to tears that they did not forget about him at all, that they congratulated him, and even gave him gifts. And it doesn't matter that it was an empty pot of honey that Winnie had licked before, and a rag from a burst balloon. Next, in all subsequent stories, Eeyore is invariably described as sad and gloomy. He usually barely moves his legs and always tends to expect the worst. This sad, soft toy definitely has a serious case of depression. Let's take the main symptoms: pessimism, hopelessness, constant despondency, anxious or no mood. irritability, tired appearance, lack of energy, feelings of uselessness and helplessness, loss of interest or pleasure in life? Well, what's not a portrait of an ever-melancholic donkey? But perhaps he also had certain reasons to feel this way and become depressed? Have you ever wondered why some sad or annoying cases most often occur with a donkey? If Daddy Milne really recorded stories after his son, in which the boy played with toys on his own wave, then we can assume that Eeyore was not his biggest favorite. In the hierarchy of Christopher's pack of friends from Fairy Forest, where Christopher Robin was an alpha, the donkey was probably in the omega position. You know how it is. There is a favorite toy, there are slightly less favorite ones, and there is one that you seem to love. It is usually in all games that it plays the role of either a victim or someone lower in the social hierarchy than all the others. Perhaps the donkey was such an omega in the boys' games. In this happy birthday story of Eeyore, we also meet, and not for the first time, another character of the fairy tale, an owl. This is a real owl that lives in its house on an old chestnut tree. It is it who writes a congratulatory inscription on the pot that Pooh gave. It was the most educated creature in the forest, of course, after Christopher. But unfortunately, it was not spared certain interesting diagnoses. The wise old bird definitely suffered from dyslexia, and this is noticeable as soon as it appears in the story, because it has a clear reading disorder. In addition, the truly wise owl probably suffered from something like intellectual isolation, which, although not a disease, is one of the significant factors that complicate social interaction, as well as the individual's own life. What is this statement based on? At least on the fact that it always greeted guests with the catchphrase, "Go away, I'm thinking." And this already clarifies a lot. In addition, the owl usually spoke and described everything too complex and detailed for others, so much so that it often led to misunderstandings. It twisted the meaning of what she wanted to say too much. The owl liked to be alone because of the belief that few people understood her because of her mind. At the same time, she could simultaneously suffer from such forced loneliness without having a worthy listener and interlocutor. It also had a tendency to negate the value of other people's opinions, an attempt to dominate them with its intelligence. By the way, it is in interaction with the owl that another obvious deviation of Winnie-the-Pooh is most clearly manifested: attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. When Winnie listened to the owl, it was knocked out completely. Just like when it listened to some long explanations from Rabbit or Christopher. Also, throughout the book, it is simply impossible not to note the huge frequency of episodes when the teddy bear was very absent-minded and forgetful. It even had a special place for thinking, where it came when it tried to somehow concentrate its thoughts and attention on one thing. It also sang songs that helped it focus. This also includes a bunch of well-known ADHD syndromes: Winnie's constant distraction to extraneous stimuli, inability to concentrate on one task, difficulty organizing something, constant search for some necessary things or thoughts that it easily lost at the most inopportune moment. Apparently, this is enough for one little bear, so let's move on with the stories of the fairy forest. Next, we will touch on a small piglet with our analysis, which also has something to hide in the questionnaire, where there will be a question about the mental state. After all, the poor pink-cheeked animal definitely suffered from generalized anxiety disorder. This is manifested, for example, when Winnie-the-Pooh decided to catch a heffalump and invited a piglet with him. What kind of animal was that? Ask them. It seems that all the inhabitants of Hundred Acre Wood shared a common hallucination. Or it was a collective suggestion character. Heffalump, like Woozle, never appeared in the reality of the fairy tales. No one had ever seen them, but everyone was sure that they existed. They caused Winnie-the-Pooh to panic because of the fear that they would devour all his honey. And so, the teddy bear always dreamed of catching them. As for the piglet, it was generally afraid of everything, and the bear was accompanied solely out of friendly solidarity. It constantly clarifies the details of the plan, which may indicate excessive thinking and fear of failure. The piglet is not so much afraid of the heffalump itself, as of uncertainty. It doesn't know what the creature looks like, and that feeds its imagination. Its fear is based on speculation and exaggeration, not on real facts. This trait is typical of people with anxiety disorders who tend to dramatize situations due to lack of information. To catch the heffalump, they dug a huge hole, put a jug of honey on its bottom as bait, and went to bed, hoping that at night the monster would fall into a trap. But Winnie-the-Pooh, waking up in the middle of the night from hunger, began to look for honey, and not finding it at home, began to go to the dug trap. Do you think the teddy bear was conscious when it did this? It is suspected that feeling hungry in its sleep, it went in a semi-conscious state of sleepwalking in the middle of the night in search of honey, which proves once again that it was literally painfully obsessed with food. What happened next? It reached into the jar of honey at the bottom of the trap, stuck its head in it, again, because it wasn't in full control of itself and got stuck. In this state, it was heard in the morning by the piglet, who, trembling with all the cells of his body, went to the pit to see if they had caught something. Winnie's desperate howl, which was amplified by the jug, almost knocked him unconscious. And of course, as always, the almighty Christopher clarified the situation and saved everyone. But back to the piglet. In almost every story where he appears, something scares him, bothers him, or causes him anxiety and uncertainty. In the descriptions of this poor creature, we can see that he is almost constantly trembling. His eyes are either dilated with anxiety, or he blushes with excitement. If we look closely at this character, we can sadly confidently state that he has a number of symptoms inherent in generalized anxiety disorder. It is difficult for him to control his feeling of anxiety. He gets tired easily, has regular sleep disorders. He cannot fall asleep, then has disturbing dreams. Everyday affairs cause him excessive anxiety and constant trembling from nervous overstrain, which is actually a normal state for him. Here we can definitely assume that even the lightest medicine for anxiety could significantly ease the quality of his life. And let's move on to a series of fairy tale stories by Alan Milne. Next, we meet new characters, Mother Kangaroo Kanga and her son Roo. In this insidious story initiated by Rabbit, we will touch on this big-eared schemer and see the internal problems of Kanga herself, as well as the potential risks of raising baby Roo. Most of all, the rabbit was dissatisfied with the appearance of the mother and baby in the forest. He encouraged everyone else to play a cruel joke with Kanga, so that she would understand that she was not welcome here. Imagine, his plan was not just to explain something to her, but to kidnap her child. All the other sawdust-stuffed fools agreed to this, because the rabbit enjoyed a certain authority among them. So they kidnapped Roo, hid a rabbit in a hole, and put a piglet in Kanga's pocket, so that she wouldn't immediately notice her son's disappearance. That's right, a sinister and cruel plan from Cute Fuzzies. But let's not forget who invented it. Rabbit is the evil genius of 100 Acre Wood. In one of the following stories, it is he who will initiate another cruel experiment in order to get rid of another new inhabitant of their forest community. In addition, he constantly organized something, tried to restore order, demanded that himself and everyone follow the rules and correctly complete tasks. So what happened to this rabbit? In fact, if you analyze his behavior in more detail, you should feel sorry for him. Do you know why he tried to push strangers out of the forest? Because they changed the usual order of things in the forest, introduced an element of new things, new relationships, the need to get used to them. His careful planning of everything and deep frustration when things didn't go as he expected is his penchant for control. The poor rabbit clearly shows signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. So let's not judge him too harshly. And as for Mother Kanga, of course, she immediately noticed the substitution as soon as she saw the piglet's nose. But instead of making a fuss, she continued to pretend that this was Roo and let Piglet go through all the circles of her care for her son. She gave him a cold bath and gave him fish oil to drink. From such care, the piglet ran away wherever his eyes looked and was glad that he was saved. And that's just one day. But imagine baby Roo lived under this overprotection and in this care all the time. Therefore, rereading the following stories and analyzing the stories of these particular characters, it is safe to note that Kanga was distinguished by, although not too acute, but still a syndrome of overprotection. And Roo threatened to grow up to be a mother's son, completely dependent on her in everything. In some ways, she can be understood. As a single mother, she was fully responsible for her son, and the fact that she carried him in the pocket on her stomach also strengthened their bond, so that she still perceived him as a part of herself, even after giving birth. And Roo, once in 100 Acre Wood, received not one, but a whole series of characters that he, due to his very young age, could perceive as father figures. Everything would have been fine. He even immediately became friends with Rabbit, who was delighted with how carefully Roo listened to him. But an unexpected threat to his upbringing came to the forest along with a new character, a tiger. By the way, it was Tigger who was the victim of another insidious plan of the rabbit, because it was he who the rabbit tried to get rid of after Kanga and Roo. One night, he just fell on Winnie-the-Pooh's head, literally out of nowhere. A strange striped animal knocked on the teddy bear's house in the middle of the night, said that he knew Christopher Robin, and Winnie, as a decent owner, suggested that he stay the night. In the morning, the two of them go around all of Winnie's friends trying to find out what the Tigger can eat. because honey is not to his taste, like the acorns of the piglet and the thistle that a donkey eats. In the end, it turned out that Tigger was simply delighted with the fish oil that Kanga treated him to, and he stayed to live with Kanga and Roo. What was threatening about this Tigger for Roo? The fact that being almost constantly near him, the baby fell under his influence most of all. But Tigger, this is impossible not to notice after reading at least a couple of pages, with his participation, has a clearly attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. He could not sit still for a minute, constantly jumped on everyone by surprise, and could not play on his own. When he had to sit up, he started fidgeting, getting nervous, and even whining. In addition, he often lied and tried to prove something to someone, which often got him into trouble. Like in the story, when he tried to prove to Roo that tigers are excellent tree climbers and ended up stuck on top of a tall pine tree, afraid to get off. Agree, not a very good role model for an already quite active kangaroo. Here's a cocktail of very unusual characters collected in the space of the book by Alan Alexander Milne. But as we can see, despite such a dissimilarity with each other, they all lived peacefully and amicably in a fairy forest, under the care and guidance of a powerful and generous boy, Christopher Robin. In the first book, they experienced a lot of interesting, bizarre, and funny adventures together. It was Winnie-the-Pooh who discovered the North Pole, which was miraculously found in their forest itself when they went on an expedition together. Then they all miraculously escaped from the flood, which suddenly covered the fairy forest, and the water lasted for 5 whole days, so that all the animals had to be saved, and it was Winnie-the-Pooh who suggested how to do this to Christopher. In gratitude for this saving idea, Christopher Robin organized a big holiday with gifts in honor of the teddy bear. This is the end of the first book and the second book, which was very similar to it because Alan Milne, inspired by the incredible success of the first and having enough material, happily continued the cycle. But his joy soon ended. The first bells appeared after the first book, when publications unanimously asked him only for stories about Christopher Robin and his friends. He became very famous almost in one day, but not at all in the way he wanted. These 2 children's books were family stories for him, which he wrote down, published, and wanted to forget about and move on as a serious dramatic writer. But Winnie-the-Pooh suddenly closed this path for him. No one else saw him as the author of serious works. Publishers refused to publish serious manuscripts, waiting for new fairy tales. Winnie-the-Pooh killed Alan Milne's career as an adult writer. So did the very close father-son relationship that lasted until Christopher reached the age of 20, when he went to college at Cambridge. Why? Imagine when you are only 6 and you are still a small child, and your whole world is reduced to a family, a nanny, and toys. You do not care at all what the whole of Britain has learned about you. Well, unless you and your parents start to invite you more often to some children's events, holidays, treat you to sweets, give you some gifts, and treat you as if you are a real celebrity. You even like it. In a small private school he was not yet touched, because his peers did not realize the connection between their classmate CR, short for Christopher Robin, and the boy from the book. But when he was sent to a boarding school in 1930, the real horror began. By that day, all his peers already knew that Christopher Robin Milne was the same boy who was friends with the teddy bear and about whom those super popular books were written. You know how violent children, especially teenagers, can be, right? Oh yes, Christopher Robin was made a permanent live target for bullying. He remembered all the Pooh's rhymes, all the phrases, all the situations from the books. He was harassed so cruelly and persistently that at the age of 11, he began taking boxing lessons to learn how to somehow defend himself from constant abusers. As he would later say, it was from the time of boarding school that his love-hate relationship began with the part of childhood that his father, without realizing it, turned into hell in his son's adult life. They continued to communicate, but very rarely. The relationship deteriorated dramatically because the resentment in the young man's heart only grew and accumulated over the years. Christopher could not forgive his father for building his popularity and big name on his childhood suffering. For the rest of his life, he remained the same Christopher Robin, making proof to everyone that he is capable of serious actions and deeds. Such is the sensational story of popularity, which hides a huge number of disturbing facts, both about the characters of the fairy tale and about the sad fate of the prototype of its hero. Stay with us, and we will discover for you many more unexpected facts about famous fairy tale stories and offer you to look at familiar characters from childhood from an unexpected angle.